My son, Ricardo, the same one for whom I patched the knees of his pants and stitched dreams of a better future, stood in the middle of my small living room, the gray light of Mexico City framing his silhouette like that of a stranger. He didn't need to shout. His voice, calm and sharp as a new blade, cut through the air thick with the dust of thread and memories. "I sold the house, Mom. It's for your own good." He said this while my fingers, twisted by arthritis and stained by decades of cheap fabric, rested on my old Singer sewing machine, its motor silent for the first time that day. The hum that had accompanied me my whole life, that had lulled him to sleep as a boy and paid for his school books, seemed to die along with something inside of me. I looked around, at the peeling walls that held the laughter of my late husband, at the rolls of fabric stacked like silent witnesses to my devotion. This house wasn't made of bricks and mortar. It was stitched with the thread of sacrifice, basted with unconditional love, and patched with the hope that in my old age, I would have a place to rest. Ricardo continued to talk about a great deal, about a little rented room, where I wouldn't be any trouble. Every word was a rusty pin driven into my chest. He saw me as an old scrap, a piece of cloth no longer fit for the quilt of his new, glossy life. But as he walked away, leaving behind the echo of his betrayal, my eyes fixed on the needle of my Singer. A needle doesn't scream, it doesn't fight. It simply pierces, joins, and strengthens. And in that deep silence, sitting at the epicenter of my crumbling world, I knew exactly what to do. He had sold the walls, but he had forgotten that the true deed to this place wasn't kept in a safe, but in a memory he had never bothered to know. And that memory, I would not sell it. I would use it to stitch my justice. If you love Jesus and believe this story will teach us something, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes of Healing and Wisdom Stories. Your subscription is an act of faith in your own transformation, and I ask you to join our community of souls who have been through something similar. The week that followed was a blur of dust and silence. Cardboard boxes, which I got for free from the corner store, rose like anonymous tombs in the middle of my studio. Every object I touched seemed to scream a memory. The small wooden chair where Ricardo learned to read, the clay pot my husband gave me on our first wedding anniversary, the colorful spools of thread that were the palette of my life. I wrapped them in old newspapers with a funereal care, feeling the weight of each sacrifice, of each sleepless night. The air, once filled with the constant comforting sound of my Singer, was now heavy, empty. It was in this scene of desolation that Ricardo returned, but not alone. He brought with him the couple who had bought my house, my life, the man, in shiny shoes that seemed to mock my worn floor, inspected every corner with a look of contempt, as if calculating the cost to erase my existence from it. The woman, wrapped in a strong, sweet perfume that suffocated the familiar smell of fabric and machine oil, turned up her nose at my rolls of cloth. I stood beside my sewing table, the only thing I hadn't packed yet, feeling like a ghost in my own story. Ricardo avoided my gaze. His gestures were quick, anxious, like those of a thief in a hurry to flee the scene of the crime. He pointed at the walls, spoke of renovations, of knocking down the kitchen wall to make a gourmet area. They talked about the future of that space, while I, the embodiment of its entire past, was treated as an obstacle to be removed as quickly as possible. The humiliation, which until then had been a silent, private wound, spilled out onto the street the moment the door opened and revealed Doña Carmen, my neighbor of over 30 years. With her curious eyes and a disguised air of pity, she stood there, witness to my dismantling. The buyer's wife, noticing the audience, raised her voice, ensuring her words were heard. "Ricardo, darling," she said, with a venomous sweetness, "tell your mother we need the property vacant by Friday. And frankly, this place will need a deep fumigation before we bring our things in. The smell of must and old age is unbearable." The air stood still. Her words hung in the air, crueler than any shout. Old age. She said it as if it were a plague. Doña Carmen lowered, her eyes embarrassed for me. Ricardo just nodded, hastily, eager to please his new rich friends. He approached me, holding out a white envelope. "Here, Mom, to help with the move and the first month's rent." It was the final payment for my dignity, delivered like a handout. I took the envelope, my hands trembling not with weakness, but with a cold fury that began to rise up my spine. He thought that money sealed the end of everything. Little did he know that the real seal, the signature that truly mattered, was kept in a place his greed would never think to look. This house wasn't born from an architect or a large construction company. It was born from my Roberto's hands and mine. I remember it as if it were yesterday. The two of us, young and full of a stubborn faith, spending our Sundays laying bricks under the strong Mexico City sun. He, with sweat staining his shirt, would teach me how to mix the cement, and his large, rough hands would cover mine, guiding me. Every brick. "Elena," he would say, "is a promise that we'll never lack a roof over our heads." When Ricardo was born, the sound of my singer became the soundtrack of our lives. Roberto worked all day at the workshop, and I sewed for others, mending the neighbors' clothes, creating party dresses for the local girls. Money was tight, but love overflowed. With the hum of the machine, I paid for the shoes Ricardo wore out playing soccer in the street, for the notebooks he filled with dreams, for his university, graduation. When Roberto was gone, taken by a sudden fever the doctors couldn't cure, the motor of that machine seemed to weep with me. But I carried on, for Ricardo. Every stitch, every hem, was a reaffirmation of Roberto's promise. This house wasn't just a property. It was a sanctuary built with calluses, sweat, and a love I believed to be eternal. It was the fabric of my family, and I was the seamstress who kept it together, even when the threads began to fray. The scissors that cut the first thread of that fabric had a first and last name, Laura. My son met her at the company where he got his first real job, a place with air conditioning and promises of a world I didn't know. Laura was polished, ambitious, and her eyes measured people's worth by what they owned, not by who they were. From the first day she set foot in my house, I felt her veiled contempt. Her thin heels seemed to pierce my humble polished cement floor, and her critical gaze wandered over my mended furniture, my curtains made from scraps. She smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. Ricardo, blinded by love and dazzled by this new universe of expensive dinners and appearances, began to change. Sunday visits became rushed phone calls. The "I love you, Mom" was replaced by "I'm busy, I'll call you later." Laura convinced him that my simple ways were an obstacle to his social climbing. I was the anchor holding him to a past of poverty he wanted to forget. The excuses for not including me in their lives became frequent. "It's a business dinner, Mom. You wouldn't feel comfortable." Or, "We're traveling for your birthday, but we'll send a gift." I watched my son transform into a pale reflection of his wife's desires, and the distance between us grew like a tear I no longer had the thread to sew. The first time the humiliation hit me squarely, like a bucket of cold water on the soul, was on a Saturday afternoon. Ricardo and Laura showed up unannounced, which was rare, and their faces showed an excitement that was not for me. They had been approved for a loan on a luxury apartment in an upscale neighborhood. My mother's heart filled with a naive pride. I ran to my room and grabbed the small metal box where I kept my savings, the money I had been putting aside for years to replace my singer with a quieter model. "Take this, my son," I said, my voice choked, holding out the crumpled bills. "It's to help with the down payment, to buy a beautiful rug." Ricardo was embarrassed, but Laura let out a short, dry laugh. "Oh, suegrita, you're a character," she said, loud enough for the neighbor sweeping the sidewalk to hear. "Save your little money for your medicines. What we need now is to cut expenses, not take on another mouth to feed in the future, you see?" The word mouth echoed in my head. I was no longer a mother, a potential grandmother. I was a burden, a future expense to be calculated, and if possible, eliminated. Ricardo said nothing. He just looked away. And in that cowardly silence, I understood that my place in his life had been demoted to the debit column. The next blow came months later, on Laura's birthday. They were throwing a big party at their new apartment. Ricardo called me, and for a moment, Foolish hope blossomed in my chest. But the invitation came with a condition. Mom, can you come early? The zipper on Laura's new dress is stuck, and only you can fix it. I went, of course. I took my sewing box, and in the middle of the sumptuous living room, while caterers arranged crystal glasses, I knelt to fix my daughter-in-law's very expensive dress. Laura rushed me, anxious for her guests to arrive. As soon as I finished, as the first people began to show up, she took me by the arm and, with a forced smile, guided me to the small service area. Please stay here, Suegrita. That way you won't get tired in the middle of so many people. The door closed, and I was left there, sitting on a hard stool next to the washing machine. I could hear the music, the laughter, the toasts. The smell of expensive perfume and rich food seeped under the door, a torture for my soul, starved of affection. At one point, the door opened suddenly. One of the guests, looking for the bathroom, saw me huddled there and gave me a look of pity and confusion before apologizing and quickly closing the door. In that instant, I was not the host's mother. I was the hidden servant, the shame that needed to be kept out of sight. After that day, silence became my most constant companion. The phone stopped ringing. Sundays became long and empty. The arthritis in my hands worsened with the cold of loneliness, and the ache in my bones seemed to echo the ache in my heart. I watched life pass by through my window. I saw the neighbors whispering when I went out to buy bread, saw their looks that mixed pity and judgment. Her son abandoned her, they must have thought. It was around this time that I began to notice Sophia, a young neighbor, thin and with sad eyes, who lived with an indifferent aunt. She also carried the weight of abandonment. Our eyes would meet across the street, two solitudes recognizing each other from a distance. One day, she saw me struggling on my way back from the market and ran to help me with the bags. From that, a silent friendship was born. She would visit me, bring me a sweet bread, and just watch me sew, fascinated. Her youthful presence was a balm on my wound. When Ricardo came with the news of the house sale, it was Sophia who found me crying amidst the boxes. It was she who, with a protective fury I no longer had, began to help me pack what was left of my life, treating my every object with a respect my own son had forgotten. We were at the back of my old wardrobe, packing the memories stored in a dark wooden chest that had belonged to my father. The smell of cedar and mothballs filled the air when we opened it. Inside were Ricardo's first baby clothes, Roberto's tools, the tablecloth I embroidered for my wedding. I cried softly, stroking each item. Sophia, her eyes full of a compassion that both broke and rebuilt me, helped me fold everything carefully. It was when she lifted the tablecloth that she saw the folder of documents, forgotten at the bottom of the chest for almost 50 years. "What's this, Doña Elena?" she asked. "Oh, just old papers, my child. The original deed. Things of no value now." But Sophia, with the stubbornness of youth, was not convinced. She opened the dry leather folder, and her eyes scanned the yellowed paper, with the elegant calligraphy of the notary from long ago. "But your name and Grandpa Roberto's name are here," she said, confused. I sighed. "I know, dear, but I signed a power of attorney for Ricardo years ago. He can do whatever he wants." Sophia frowned, her index finger stopping on a paragraph at the end of the page, almost hidden. She began to read aloud, and with each word, her expression changed from confusion to shock, and then to a gleam of triumph. She looked up, and her eyes met mine, sparking with a new hope. "Doña Elena," she said, her voice firmer than ever, "his power of attorney is worthless. Grandpa Roberto, he left something in writing, a special clause. It says that this house, the soul of the family, can only be sold with your signature, witnessed on the day, in your presence." And he wrote down why. Those words from Sophia, read from the time-yellowed paper, were not like a lightning bolt, but like the steady hand of my Roberto on my shoulder. I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in a long time. The fear that had paralyzed me, the fear of confronting my own son and of dying alone, simply dissolved, replaced by a cold, unshakable dignity. I looked at my hands, at the prominent veins and the joints swollen with arthritis, and for the first time in years, I saw not the fragility of old age, but the map of a life of work and resistance. That night, I packed nothing more. Instead, with Sophia's help, we tidied the house. We cleaned every corner, polished the old furniture, and placed the embroidered tablecloth that started it all on the kitchen table. I took my best dress from the wardrobe, a navy blue one I had made myself, and ironed it with ceremonial care. I wasn't preparing to leave, I was arming myself to stay. Sophia, with the loyalty of a blood granddaughter, stayed by my side, her young eyes reflecting my newfound determination. She held the document as if it were a sacred relic. "What are we going to do, Doña Elena?" she whispered, excitement and nervousness in her voice. I looked at her, a small smile forming on my lips. "We're going to wait, my child. Sometimes the best sewing is that which is done with the thread of patience. Let them come to us." And we waited. I, sitting in my armchair, and she, on a stool beside me, 2 generations of abandoned women, united by a piece of paper that represented much more than a house. It represented the right to exist. The next morning brought with it the scent of confrontation. Ricardo arrived punctually, accompanied not only by the buying couple, but also by a man in a gray suit and a leather briefcase, an officer of the court. Their arrogance filled the air. The buyer's wife was already measuring the walls with her eyes, planning the decor. Ricardo wouldn't look at me. His attention focused on resolving the problem as quickly as possible. "Mom, this is Mr. Matias. He's only here to ensure the eviction proceeds peacefully. Please, don't make things more difficult," he said, in the tone of someone speaking to a stubborn child. I remained silent. With a nod, I asked Sophia to step forward. She, with steady hands, handed the leather folder to the officer. "I think you need to read this before you proceed," she said, her voice clear and firm. The man took the document with an air of annoyance, expecting another useless delay. Ricardo chuckled humorlessly. "What is this farce? I have the power of attorney." But his smile died slowly as the officer read. The man's brow furrowed. He reread it once, twice, running his finger over the final clause, the one my Roberto, in his silent wisdom, had insisted on including. The officer looked up, his gaze now professional and serious. He looked at Ricardo, then at me. "This power of attorney is invalid for the sale of this property," he declared, his voice echoing in the tense room. "The original deed contains an ironclad clause that requires the in-person signature of the owner, Elena Rodriguez, for the transfer of title. Without her signature, this sales contract has no legal value." A heavy silence fell over the room. Ricardo's face underwent a grotesque metamorphosis. From impatience to disbelief, from disbelief to fury, and finally to a pale, sickly humiliation. The buying couple turned on him, their whispers turning into furious accusations. "You deceived us! You said everything was settled!" But I wasn't paying attention to them. My eyes were fixed on my son. I stood up, leaning on my old armchair, and walked slowly towards him. For the first time, he was forced to look at me, to see the woman he had tried to erase. "You heard the officer, Ricardo," I said, my voice low but laden with the weight of 50 years of love and pain. "You sold the walls, my son, but you forgot that the soul of this house has no price. This paper is just the legal proof, but the true deed is stitched into every corner of this place with my love and your father's." I touched his arm, and he flinched as if my hand burned. "You thought I was just an old scrap, something to be discarded, but this scrap has a memory, and it has value." The buyers, shouting threats of lawsuits, stormed out, slamming the door. The officer of the court, after a brief, respectful nod, also left. Ricardo stood there, alone, stripped of his arrogance, reduced to the image of a lost boy. He said nothing. He just gave me one last look, a mixture of hatred and shame, and left. That night, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully in my own house, and the next morning, I would take the sharpest scissors I had, not to cut fabric, but to cut away the past and begin to sew a new future, one that no one could ever take from me. We would like to feel your presence at this very moment. Please write in the comments which city you are watching us from and what time it is there now. By doing this, we create a network of energy and support for this story, a reminder that we are not alone in our battles. Each comment is a point of light in our healing process. In the days that followed that storm, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief along with me. The silence that was once of abandonment was now one of peace. With Sophia's tireless help, we began to unpack the boxes, but with a different purpose. We weren't restoring an old life. We were building a new one. Every object was questioned. Does this bring us joy? Or is it just a memory of a painful time? The dark, heavy curtains that held onto grief were the first to go. In their place, I used the most colorful and vibrant scraps I had, stitching a quilt of light that flooded the room with new colors. The old Singer machine, once my lonely work companion, was cleaned, polished, and placed in the center of the room, no longer as a tool for survival, but as the throne of a queen in her reconquered kingdom. We painted the peeling walls a luminous white, and the smell of fresh paint mixed with the smell of brewed coffee, creating the perfume of renewal. Sophia brought flowers from the market, small bouquets of bright colors that she placed in glass bottles. The space transformed, and I transformed with it. With every nail we pulled, every layer of dust we cleaned, I felt I was tearing the sadness and humiliation from my own skin, mending my soul stitch by stitch. I didn't seek out news of Ricardo. I didn't have to. News, good or bad, always finds a way to arrive in a neighborhood like ours. It was Doña Carmen who told me, over the garden wall, as she hung her laundry. She told me that the buyers, furious, had filed a heavy lawsuit against my son for fraud and misrepresentation. She said that to cover the legal fees and return the money he had already spent, Ricardo had to sell his precious luxury apartment in a hurry for a fraction of its value. He and Laura, according to the rumors, moved into a small rented apartment on the other side of the city, a place with no gourmet balcony or elegant doorman. Hearing this, I didn't feel the burst of vengeful joy that others might have expected. I felt a deep, hollow sadness, the ache of a phantom limb. It was the pain for the son I raised, not for the man he had become. He and his wife had sacrificed family, honor, and their own mother on the altar of appearance, and in the end, they were left with nothing. The luxury they wore as armor was, in fact, a fragile glass shell, which shattered on first contact with the truth. The justice I was served didn't come from a court of law, but from the laws of life itself, which silently collect the price of ingratitude. It was Sophia, with her old soul in a young body, who planted the seed for the next phase of my life. Doña Elena, she said one afternoon, watching me mend a neighbor's dress for free. Your hands have a gift. It's not just for fixing tears in fabric, but for mending lives. Why don't you teach what you know? The idea scared me. Me, an old woman with a primary school education, a teacher? But Sophia insisted, with a faith in me that I myself was just learning to have. We pooled the little money I had saved and bought 2 used sewing machines. Sophia painted a wooden sign with beautiful, slightly crooked handwriting. Grandma Elena's Studio, Sewing Futures. We hung it on the front door. At first, few came. Shy girls, daughters of laundresses and factory workers, who had no money for school, but had in their eyes the same hunger for dignity I'd had my whole life. I didn't just teach them how to thread a needle or make a straight hem. I taught them the patience it takes to undo a wrong stitch, the precision needed to cut a pattern, and the beauty of creating something useful and beautiful from a simple piece of cloth. In a few months, the lonely hum of my Singer had multiplied. The sound of 5, 6, 7 sewing machines working together filled my house, becoming a song of work, hope, and community. Grandma Elena's Studio became the heart of the neighborhood. The young women who used to spend their afternoons aimlessly now had a purpose. They laughed, talked, and shared secrets and fears as they learned a trade. Sophia, my Sophia, blossomed, becoming my right-hand woman, organizing classes, negotiating with fabric suppliers, and most importantly, acting as a big sister to all the students. We celebrated our first year with a small party on the sidewalk. The girls, radiant, wore the first dresses they had ever made, themselves, parading for their parents and neighbors on a makeshift red carpet. The joy was palpable, genuine. In that moment, I remembered the cold, empty party in Laura's apartment, and I understood the difference between a celebration of appearances and a celebration of the soul. There, on my simple street, with food made by the mothers and music from an old radio, there was more wealth and truth than in all the luxury my son had once chased. Today, sitting in my armchair, I watch the late afternoon light stream through my colorful curtains, illuminating the dust of thread dancing in the air. The house is quiet, the students have gone home, but their energy remains. Sometimes I look at Roberto's photo on the shelf, and it's as if I can hear him whisper, "Didn't I tell you, Elena?" Every brick was a promise. He didn't promise that life would be easy, but that we would have a strong foundation. And he was right. My son, in his search for shortcuts, forgot that life, just like good. Sewing requires time, dedication, and a strong thread of character. His luxury apartment is gone. His wife's designer clothes have disappeared. I still have my walls that need a touch-up of paint, and my hands that ache when the weather turns cold. Today, I have no luxury, but I have gained something that no money can buy, and no ingratitude can steal. I have gained respect, and that no one can take from me anymore.